The Anti-Fascist Alliances formed during the Second World War were uniquely composed of countries and political forces from different social systems and ideologies. They came together in the pursuit of one common goal: to defeat fascism. The unprecedented size of this alliance was a critical factor in defeating Axis powers.
抗日战争时期，苏联飞行大队长库里申科来华同中国人民并肩作战。他动情地说：“我像体验我的祖国的灾难一样，体验着中国劳动人民正在遭受的灾难。”他英勇牺牲在中国大地上，中国人民没有忘记这位英雄。一对普通的中国母子， 已为他守灵半个多世纪。
This is Xishan Park in Wanzhou, Chongqing Municipality. Grigory Akumovich Kulishenko's grave is located here.
When I接我母亲的班儿来担任这份工作，我的母亲都跟我讲，作为我们中国人是知道感恩的，请库里申科的烈士的亲人们和俄罗斯的人民放心。 你们的儿子是为我们国家的解放事业献上他的生命，我们永远会对库里申科烈士的墓地长期的守护下去。
库里申科，空军少校大队长，1939年春受苏联政府派遣来华援助抗日。
Итак, было 14 октября 1939 года. Успешно окончив бомбежку, наши поспешили на базу самолеты. Но осколок зенитного снаряда пробил мотор, один из моторов, у ведущего самолета, у самолета моего отца. И летчик был тяжело ранен. Он приказал экипажу из 2 человек прыгать с парашютами. Но впереди была широкая, огромная река с гористыми, высокими отвесными стенами. Куда сажать? Только на воду. И люди с земли видели, как от самолета сначала отделились 2 черные точки маленькие, потом раскрылись парашюты, а потом самолет вдруг вздрогнул, накренился на левое крыло и, кувыркаясь, упал в реку. Так погиб мой отец.
According to documents published in the Soviet Union, volunteers of the Soviet Air Force came to Nanjing in December 1937, joining the fighting in secret. They were ordered back home at the end of 1941. During this period, more than 2,000 men of the Soviet Air Force came to China. More than 700 of them fought in 25 battles, defending Nanjing, Wuhan, Nanchang, Chongqing, and Lanzhou. During over 1,000 fighting missions, they shot down more than 500 Japanese planes, sacrificing more than 200 of their own pilots.
In 1937, when war broke out, first, of course, in the north, at the Marco Polo Bridge incident, and in Shanghai, China still received a lot of support from the Soviet Union. After the war broke out, the Soviets supplied a huge amount of material, important advisors, and most importantly, an air force. So that was very critical.
The Soviet Union helped China in the anti-Japanese war against a unique historical backdrop. In the 1930s, fascism in Germany, Italy and Japan began to grow stronger and stronger. It was the source for the war brewing both in the West and the East. The Soviet Union would have to face threats from the East and West at the same time. Meanwhile, Japan was frenziedly encroaching into Chinese territory. Its aim was to expand its occupation of China and invade the Soviet Union, ultimately conquering all of Asia.
Вступать в открытый конфликт с Японией в 1937 году. Тем не менее, в его интересах было, конечно, не допустить поражения Китая.
The Soviets knew very well the international significance of China's war of resistance against Japan and its potential impact upon their interests. They decided to support China in tying down the Japanese army so that they could concentrate their own forces on the more dangerous Germany.
Отправить туда самолеты, отправить военную технику и грузы, которые пересылались в Китай, это было очень чрезвычайно сложным делом. Была создана трасса, она проходила на юг Советского Союза, дальше в Урумчи и еще дальше. И вот на этой трассе была очень высокая аварийность.
Statistics show that from October 1937 to the outbreak of war between Germany and the Soviet Union in April 1941, the Soviet Union gave China $173 million in loans to buy ammunition. This loan was the largest received by China from any other country. And China used the loan to buy planes, tanks, motor vehicles, cannon, guns, and other kinds of ammunition. The main battlefield in the east was ablaze with gunfire. The war between China and Japan had become truly gruesome. 1941 looked like just another year of tenacious confrontation, but there were two stunning events that made it different. Early in the morning of June the 22nd, 1941, 3 million soldiers, 3,500 tanks and motorized units of the German army separated into 3 columns and launched a surprise attack on the Soviet Union. The Soviet-German War had begun. One month earlier, Yan Baohang, an intelligence agent of the Communist Party of China, learnt from a source that Germany would attack the Soviet Union around June the 20th. He reported the information to Zhou Enlai in Chongqing. At the same time, Pan Hannian, a CPC undercover agent based in Hong Kong, reported the same information to Zhou Enlai. CPC leaders passed the information to the Soviet Union military intelligence team, who immediately sent it to Moscow by coded telegram. In return, the Soviet Union sent a telegram of gratitude to the CPC Central Committee. The outbreak of the Soviet-German War offered 2 alternatives for the Japanese: march north to fight the Soviet Union, or to head south and invade Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. The Japanese decided they must first conquer China, no matter which direction they took, because they had to secure their rear, obtain war resources, and establish bases for either a northern or southern campaign. Chinese soldiers and civilians had defiantly fought the Japanese for 10 years by themselves. The Japanese could not defeat China. With 2/3 of their troops engaged, there were no spare forces to march south and north at the same time. Their ambition to conquer the world was impossible. For this reason, Japanese authorities made the decision: march south. The reason was simple. Sugiyama Hajime, Chief of Staff to the Japanese Army, put it this way: Japan has deployed too much force in China and cannot engage the Soviet Union in a fight. He further pointed out that Hitler had conquered most of Western Europe. Their former colonies in the East were left unattended. Japan must take advantage and send troops to the Southeast Asia to obtain oil and other important resources. In August 1941, as Britain, the Soviet Union and China were fully engaged in fighting the fascists of Germany, Italy and Japan, the world was surprised to see that the United States still remained neutral, and Britain had adopted the historic Atlantic Charter. On December the 8th, 1941, Japanese forces shocked the United States by bombing Pearl Harbor, leading to the breakout of war in the Pacific. In less than 2 hours, the US Army suffered more than 4,000 casualties. Most of its main warship fleet was destroyed. After hearing the news, American President Roosevelt sat for 18 minutes without uttering a single word.
I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
On December the 8th, 1941, the United States and Great Britain declared war against Japan. On the next day, China declared war against Japan, Germany, and Italy. China finally had allies after 10 years of fighting alone against the Japanese. The bell of ill fate began to ring for the war fanatics themselves. On January the 1st, 1942, representatives from 26 countries, including China, the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, signed the Declaration of United Nations in Washington, D.C. It announced their agreement with the principles of the Atlantic Charter. Together they resolved to use all of their resources to defeat the Axis powers and to never negotiate peace with hostile countries. An international anti-fascist alliance had been officially founded. As far back as 1937, CPC leader Mao Zedong had foreseen the benefits of realizing world peace as early as possible. Mao Zedong said that it was necessary to establish an international anti-Japanese united front with Britain and the United States. This was an unprecedented marvel in the history of war, as well as a truly historical moment in the story of mankind. The two battlefields in the East and West had become one. Millions of human beings gave their blood and lives in this conflict, the likes of which the world had never before seen.
The great contribution of China was that it never surrendered to Japan in the years when it was fighting alone against Japanese aggression from 37 up to 41. And had they done so, then the Japanese probably would have expanded into the rest of Asia much earlier, and it would have been an entirely different situation.
By 1941, Japan had sent more than 550,000 soldiers to northern and central China, exceeding the total number of Japanese land forces deployed in various parts of Southeast Asia and the Pacific. More than 330,000 of these soldiers were used to consolidate the Japanese-occupied areas where the CPC had established numerous resistance bases. In July 1941, the Japanese Army's main forces launched a large-scale Big Sweep campaign against the CPC-led resistance bases in northern, central, and southern China. Japanese troops adopted the policy of burn all, kill all, loot all. On the 20th of July, more than 17,000 Japanese soldiers and their puppet Chinese soldiers attacked Yancheng from several sides, and then went on to attack Funing, Dongou, and Yilin. After they took over the county town of Funing in early August, they marched on to attack areas in central Jiangsu province. Chen Yi, acting commander of the new Fourth Army, and Liu Shaoqi, the army's political commissar, directed their main forces in surprise raids and ambushes, taking advantage of northern Jiangsu province's complex terrain. The elite units of the Japanese army suffered heavy losses, and the new Fourth Army used water mines against Japanese armored motorboats. During a resistance campaign lasting more than a month, the new Fourth Army engaged the Japanese army in over 130 battles and killed more than 3,800 Japanese and Chinese puppet soldiers, suffering 1,000 casualties of their own, and destroying at least 30 Japanese motorboats, finally retaking the strategic areas of Funing and Dongou. Under the leadership of the CPC, Chinese civilians and armed forces in the Japanese-occupied areas carried on the fight against the Japanese. They took a heavy share of responsibility off of the front line in fighting the Japanese. Their tenacious struggle kept the main force of the enemy within Japanese-occupied areas.
And as a result, if China had been pacified, if the Chinese had surrendered, then the Japanese would have been freer to maybe attack the Soviet Union, or perhaps to move into Southeast Asia, maybe even to think about attacking British India. Now, none of these things happened, but one of the reasons is that China continued to fight, and it forced large numbers of Japanese troops, Japanese attention, Japanese resources to be held down in China. And that in the end turned out to be a major contribution to the shaping of Asia and ultimately the world we live in today.
Honor is won with hard work and endurance. Dreams can come true only by the hard pursuit of hope. When the Soviet Union is mentioned, people never fail to recall the military parade on that snowy day of July the 7th, 1941 in Moscow's Red Square. It was the saddest and yet most stirring military parade since the October Revolution. The situation in Moscow had changed. German troops were on Moscow's doorstep. The city had to face the possibility of becoming occupied. Adolf Hitler and German Minister of Foreign Affairs Joachim von Ribbentrop asked Japan 3 times to join them in joint attacks on the Soviet Union from the east and west before joining forces at the Siberian Railway. However, the Japanese were bogged down fighting in their occupied areas in China and on the front line. How could they spare troops to help Germany attack the Soviet Union? Richard Sorge, a Soviet special agent, twice obtained intelligence that Japan had decided to send its troops southward and not declare war on the Soviet Union due to the pressure they were under on the Chinese battlefield. He reported the news to Moscow immediately. Joseph Stalin decided to send Soviet troops stationed in the Far East to the Western Front to fight the Nazis. During the Moscow campaign, 16 divisions of the Soviet army were called from Siberia to Moscow. These forces played an important role in defending the city.
Естественно, значит, партизанское движение, оно сковывало военные силы Японии на территории Китая, и рассматривая этот вопрос в связи с тем, что могли ли японские силы, значит, напасть на Советский Союз, и какая роль Компартии Китая в этом случае, да, естественно, значит, в 1941-1945 году роль Компартии Китая значительно выросла после того, что была развернута определенная борьба среди китайского народа противостоять японской агрессии.
Soviet Marshal Vasily Ivanovich Chuikov once said at their hardest time during the war, Japan didn't attack the Soviet Union, but it shed so much Chinese blood. His words are true. Whilst Great Britain and the United States were fighting in Europe, North Africa and the Pacific, and the Soviets and Germans were in the miserable tug of war, Chinese soldiers and civilians were engaging most of the Japanese forces in China with their very lives. While the Nazis were invading Poland and the Soviet Union from 1939 to 1941, two battles were being fought in Changsha that were of strategic support to the Allies. The third Changsha military operation took place from December 1941 to January 1942, shortly after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. On December the 23rd, 1941, 4 divisions and units of the Japanese 11th Army, numbering 120,000 men, attacked the northern part of Hunan province to prevent the Chinese army aiding British troops in Hong Kong. Four days of intense gunfire occurred in and around the city of Changsha. Soldiers from both sides fought constantly in house-to-house combat, seesawing back and forth. The Japanese first launched a failed attack on the southeastern corner of the city, moving on to attack the South City Gate, and again failing. Finally, they moved on to attack the North City Gate, and once again faltered. All the men of the 10th Army defending the city of Changsha, including its commander, wrote their final words before the beginning of the battle. "I will take it as my repayment to the country if we win. I want to make Changsha my grave if I die." The Chinese army suffered approximately 28,000 casualties in the Third Battle of Changsha. The P-40 fighter planes in front of the Flying Tiger Memorial Museum in Zhejiang County, Hunan Province, the Control Tower, the Sino-US Air Force Club, and the statue of General Claire Lee Chennault are all monuments of fierce bravery. The American volunteer group, known as the Flying Tigers, was formed on August 1st, 1941, and led by Commander Claire Lee Chennault. The group was composed of 3 squadrons. Their task was to protect the skies above Yunnan and the Burma Road. The American volunteer group engaged a squadron of Japanese bombers for the first time on December 20th above Kunming. They shot down 6 and wounded 3 Japanese pilots without any casualties. After the battle, they were named the Flying Tigers. The Flying Tigers engaged Japanese planes in the air, covering Chinese land forces during battles and flying high over mountains to deliver supplies to the Chinese army. Many planes crashed into the icy mountains due to harsh conditions when the Flying Tigers were flying on the hump route, also known as the death route. Some people urged President Roosevelt to give up the hump airlift operation. The president had this to say: "It cannot be helped. This is war. If we give up the broad southwest of China, Japan will send 1 to 1.5 million Japanese soldiers to attack us. In that case, the war on the Pacific will be a threat to the safety of the continental United States." The National Memorial Cemetery is a tranquil and solemn place. Tombstones stand side by side on the slope of a steep hill. Buried beneath are the remains of 9,168 Chinese soldiers who died defending China. Americans and Britons realized the importance of the battlefield in China. They created the China War Zone and appointed Chiang Kai-shek the zone's supreme commander, and Joseph Stilwell, an American lieutenant general, its chief of staff. Soon afterwards, China organized an expeditionary army to support the British and Indian armies defending the Burma Road. Approximately 10,000 soldiers of the Chinese Expeditionary Army marched onto the battlefield in Tonggu under the command of Division Commander Dai Anlan.
戴安澜这个部队呀，是3月8号他就到了那边去了。我3月15号带着司机卫去看他，8号到15号1个礼拜。 他已经把工事挖得很好。
The Tonggu defense battle started on March the 20th. More than 20,000 men of the 55th Division of the Japanese Army attacked the peripheral positions under the cover of its air force. Division 200 was flanked on 3 sides. They were forced to retreat from the bunkers into the city. Under intense fire, Dai Anlan said to his men, "If the division commander dies, the deputy division commander takes over his post. If the deputy division commander dies, the chief of staff takes over his post. If the chief of staff dies, one of the regiment commanders takes over his post." All the men of the division pledged to die or live with Tonggu. The Tonggu battle was one of the largest, longest, and caused the greatest amount of casualties to the Japanese troops in the Burma Defense Campaign. It allowed the British Army in Burma to withdraw successfully, one time for new units of the Chinese Expeditionary Army to rally, and ensured the safe evacuation of the entire division. In April 1942, the Japanese army surrounded the 1st British Burmese Army after it took over Renantiang. Division Commander James Bruce Scott pled to Field Marshal William Slim, asking for the Chinese army to rescue them. Liu Fangwu, commander of Regiment 113 of the new 38th Division, was ordered to carry out the rescue mission. After a day of fierce fighting, Regiment 113 took over the entire Renantiang oil field at the cost of more than 200 lives. They killed over 1,200 Japanese soldiers, including the commander of the Japanese Joint Corps, and freed 7,000 soldiers of the 1st British Burmese Division and the 7th Armoured Brigade, along with 500 British prisoners of war, American missionaries and reporters. The exhausted British shouted loudly, "Long live China," with tears in their eyes, and hugged the Chinese soldiers. They thanked the Chinese for saving their lives. "50 years later, the World Daily of the United States reports that in Chicago, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher shook hands with Liu Fangwu, speaking kind words. "Thank you for saving 7,000 British. Look, 7,000 soldiers and 500 American missionaries and reporters. They must have their grandchildren and great-grandchildren by now. Today, I would like to express our deep gratitude and appreciation on behalf of the British government and people." From the 22nd to the 26th of November 1943, Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill and Chiang Kai-shek, state heads of the United States, Britain and China respectively, met in Cairo, their first and only meeting in the Second World War as state leaders. They met to discuss the war against Japan. They also adopted a plan to launch counterattacks in northern Burma. The Cairo Declaration not only put emphasis on carrying the anti-fascist war to the very end, but also confirmed China's right to retain the sovereignty of northeast China, Taiwan and Penghu Islands. This declaration was an important basis for dealing with the issues related to Japan after the war. The meeting raised China's international status and its role on the main battlefield in the East during the Second World War. Before the Cairo meeting, Chinese, American and British troops stationed in India launched counterattacks in late October 1943. In May of 1944, the Chinese Expedition Army, in cooperation with the 14th Wing of the American Air Force, attacked Japanese troops in western Yunnan province. This maneuver supported the Allied forces from China, Britain and the United States in further attacking Japanese troops stationed in Yunnan. The Indian Army and the Chinese Expedition Army deployed 22 divisions to fight the Japanese troops in northern Burma and western Yunnan. They retook over 50 towns and 83,000 square kilometers of land in Yunnan, as well as killing nearly 50,000 Japanese soldiers. The victory in northern Burma and Yunnan reopened the international communication line in southwest China and drove the Japanese troops out of China's southwest, relieving allies fighting in the Pacific. In May 1983, Geng Biao, vice chairman of the Chinese National People's Congress, received a photo album from a member of an American business delegation visiting China. Written on the flyleaf of the album are these words: "To our fearless leader, Geng Biao." A photo on the first page shows two men in the uniform of the 8th Route Army on the northern Shanxi Plateau. One of them is Geng Biao and the other is Captain Paul de Mukesh, member of the US Army Observation Group in Yan'an. Captain Mukesh was later appointed as a consultant to the American government. This album records many events when the US delegation was in the resistance base of Jinchaji. After the Pacific War broke out, the American government began to strengthen its cooperation with the Communist Party of China.
The experience of the Communist Party in Yan'an and in some of its other base areas, particularly north of the Yangtze River, was absolutely key to halting the Japanese advance in China. And Mao was able to develop a strategy of guerrilla warfare that was very suitable for fighting an enemy that had overwhelming superiority in terms of its military capabilities, its weaponry, its tanks, etc., etc.
American B-29 bombers bombarded Japan in June 1944 on a large scale, greatly damaging Japanese morale and boosting the spirit of the Allies. However, only 47 of the 92 bombers dropped bombs on their targets accurately. In order to improve the accuracy of their bombing, the Americans wished to work with the Chinese communists in Yan'an because they were not satisfied with security measures under KMT control in Chongqing. Their three main tasks were to study the CPC's strategy, to learn about the political situation, and to exchange military tactics. They asked the CPC leaders to provide a safeguard to the 58th Bombardment Wing of the US Air Force in northern China, establishing intelligence bases in Japanese-occupied areas in northern and eastern China. The US needed information for bombing Japan and sought the CPC's help in ensuring the safety of American fighter planes and rescuing pilots. Mao Zedong, Zhu De, and other CPC leaders were very receptive to the Americans' request. The General Headquarters of the 8th Route Army and CPC Central Committee demanded all the military commands and CPC grassroots organizations give full support to the Allied forces and aid to save pilots of the Allied countries. These instructions were rapidly carried out. Within 2 months, the General Headquarters of the 8th Route Army gave the US Army Observation Group more than 120 pieces of intelligence about the Japanese Army. The Observation Group also established an important channel for gaining information about the Japanese Army. The American forces were satisfied greatly with the help of the CPC in Yan'an. The third team of the US Army Observation Group carried out a special mission to guarantee the success of the strategic bombing actions against Japan. The CPC Central Committee sent a team of guards headed by Geng Biao to escort the Americans across the Yellow River, towards the east and through the blockade of the Japanese Army lines, establishing ground intelligence stations in northern China. Captain de Mukesh of the 58th Wing was in charge of the specifics of this mission. Geng Biao led a platoon to escort de Mukesh and his 10 intelligence agents. He assigned 2 men to guard each American. The Chinese soldiers did everything to look after them, teaching them to ride horses and how to evade danger. They also asked the Americans to put on clothes worn by local common folk. The Americans spoke highly of the 8th Route Army. They said that their cooperation could not have been better. Shortly after the third team reached the eastern side of the Yellow River, the radios they had placed along their way began to work. The Americans used them to send valuable information to the US Army Observation Group in Yan'an, as well as the 58th Bombardment Wing in Chongqing. The American bomber units used this precious information to bomb Japan with great precision. The information helped improve their battle tactics and raise the efficiency of their bombing missions. The General Headquarters of the US Army gave this comment. The CPC's weather station in Yan'an provided reliable data. It is the best of the 10 weather stations the US has helped to build in China. First Lieutenant White Ease, member of the 3rd Team, died in an encounter with the Japanese in the Taihang Mountains. The 8th Route Army suffered heavy losses in an effort to retrieve his corpse. Jiang Aiping, Chinese defense minister, shook hands with 3 elderly Americans and hugged them at a reception hall in the Pentagon on June the 11th, 1984. They looked closely at each other. On August the 20th, 1944, units under Jiang Aiping's command and local residents of the Jianying County in Jiangsu Province carried out a mission to rescue 5 American pilots, including those who had ejected from a damaged bomber during an air battle with Japanese planes. A dozen Chinese soldiers died in the rescue mission, and among the 5 pilots was Lieutenant Colonel Sawai. These elderly American men are 3 of the pilots. On April the 18th, 1942, the United States launched its first air raid on Tokyo. 16 B-25 bombers with 80 crew members took part in the Doolittle raid. After they had dropped all their bombs, 15 of the bombers were forced to land in China. The other plane landed in the Soviet Union. The Japanese caught crew members of 2 bombers when they landed in a Japanese-occupied area. Chinese civilians and soldiers rescued the rest of the 64 crew members from 13 bombers before their return to the United States. After the American pilots left for home, the Japanese brutally punished the Chinese civilians who had helped save the Americans. China was the vanguard in deterring the fascist aggression and a strong supporter to the anti-fascist allies. It was part of the strategic cooperation of the Allied countries and a mainstay in the force needed to defeat Japanese fascists. Comrade Norman Bethune, a member of the Communist Party of Canada, was around 50 when the Communist Parties of Canada and United States sent him to China. He made light of traveling thousands of miles to help China in the war of resistance against Japan. He arrived in Yan'an in the spring of 1938 and went to work in the Wutai Mountains, and later, to our great sorrow, died a martyr at his post. Mao Zedong, leader of the Communist Party of China, said these words on December the 21st, 1939, in memorial of Dr. Bethune. He praised the Canadians sincerely. What kind of spirit makes a foreigner selflessly adopt the cause of the Chinese people's liberation as his own? It is the spirit of internationalism, the spirit of communism, from which every Chinese communist must learn. Many foreigners supported the Chinese people to fight the Japanese, like Dr. Bethune. They include K.S. Coateness, Agnes Smedley, Anna L. Strong, Edgar Snow, George Hatton, Louis Ely, John Raber, Bernard Singberg, and John McGee. They traveled a long way to China to fight the fascists together with the Chinese people. Many of them died in China, the main battlefield of the East. This elderly man, speaking fluent Chinese, is Kobayashi Hirosumi. After he was captured in Japan's invasion in China, he changed his attitude towards Japan's aggressive war and joined the Anti-War Alliance as an 8th Army soldier. Like other Japanese youth in the Japanese Industrial and Agricultural School in Yan'an, Kobayashi Hirosumi was called by the nickname Japanese Balu. The school was founded by the Communist Party of China to reform captured and surrendered Japanese soldiers so that they could realize the harm Japanese militarists were inflicting on mankind and the aggressive nature of fascism in Germany, Italy and Japan. These Japanese soldiers were urged to renege and join the just cause of humanity. Throughout the War of Resistance against Japan, more than 1,000 Japanese prisoners of war joined the 8th Route Army and the new 4th Army, fighting in the Japanese-occupied areas in China. They joined the International Anti-Fascist Alliance and became comrades in arms of the Chinese people. A common enemy promoted the formation of an alliance of justice. A common goal brought peace-loving people throughout the world together. They pooled their strength and spirit together. The Alliance of Justice, formed in the Second World War, will forever be of historical significance. Surely there is no achievement more worthy of recognition and remembrance, both now and for the rest of human time.
见血几道枪，女儿如铁，男儿刚。中流击水，擎天柱，浴火重生，立东方5000年，文明不曾消亡，中华民族不畏惧创伤，看我祖先日月辉煌，追求复兴梦想。